Hey there, I'm Teresa Norton, and welcome to The View from Abroad, a podcast that each week takes a look back at one of the mostly humorous columns that I wrote for a Hong Kong newspaper from 1993 until 2000. I wrote about married life and political correctness and flirting and aging and national identity and parenting. Each week, I start off by reading one of those columns, and then I interview a guest to discuss how and if our opinions, our beliefs have changed or not changed over time and why that may be. And my guest this week, you can hear the big smile on my voice and on my face, is Staci Ford, who is affiliated associate lecturer in the Faculty of Arts at University of Hong Kong. And Staci is also the author of Troubling American Women, a book in which I am delighted and was somewhat flabbergasted to be featured. So we're going to get a chance to talk with Staci a little bit more about that. But before we get Staci in the studio with us, let's kick off with that newspaper column I sent to her last week, which was published in the South China Morning Post just after Hong Kong's first chief executive had been appointed. And this would have been December of 1996.
Tea for Tung and Tung for tea. I don't know, maybe I'm nuts, but as I was sitting at the kitchen table rolling orange-flavored cookie dough into pretzel shapes, I got a lump in my throat, and it wasn't a blob of uncooked cookie pastry that was making it hard for me to swallow. I was listening to radio coverage of the election of our new chief executive, and as the morning and the pretzels rolled on, I became increasingly aware that more than just my 11th batch of Christmas cookies was being made. I was bearing witness to the opening of arguably the most important chapter in this territory's history in more than a century. I know some expatriates who might find it hard to swallow for different reasons. This is the end of an era and all of the good and bad things that went with the settlement of Asia by the West. I am spared much of the nostalgia for our colonial past by virtue of my age and background. When I came out to Hong Kong, I never considered it a move to the British outpost. I was moving to Asia. I had no crown in which to place any jewels, so I don't feel I've lost the last one. Yes, this marks the end of an era, to be sure, but more importantly, and I think that's what this column is working its way toward, this is the beginning of something new, which excites and involves me. I don't want to argue about elected versus selected. We've had our governor selected for us for more than a century, and however you view the selection committee, the fact of the matter is that votes were cast, the media was there, and the sun rose the next day. This is how it begins. We are living right smack dab in the middle of a history lesson. Now it's up to us to pay attention and learn something. I've been interviewed by quite a lot of Chinese press over the past couple of weeks regarding the handover. One of the interviewers, who was focusing on my being a non-Chinese who considers Hong Kong home, asked what I had learned from living here almost 15 years. I wish I had that question to answer again right now. I would say that I am learning to be patient, which in Hong Kong sounds a little bit like getting a lesson in charity from Imelda. What I mean is that in this city where time is money and both seem to fly from you quicker than you can account for them, there is a philosophy that runs like a cord under all the clang and the clatter. And if you are here long enough and you care enough to listen, you can learn that there is more than one way to skin an endangered species. That's not exactly it. It's something more like, there are many roads to the same place. It's just that most of them are under construction, so you have to wait for that old guy with the sign to flip it around that says go instead. Oh, look, folks, this ain't the I Ching. I'm just another white girl rolling out cookie dough and contemplating a little chocolate-dipped orange pretzel logic. The point is, if I may quote our new boss, you can discuss things over a cup of tea. And a cup can turn into a pot, and God knows there are many teapots in this part of the world. We've got some interesting times ahead of us, and a deep cleansing breath and a cup of tea or two would probably do us all a bit of good. As I write this column, I have a recent edition of the South China Morning Post before me. Mr. Tung is smiling at me from the front page. Congratulations, I want to say. Take good care of yourself. we're counting on you to take good care of us. Now, before you get started, enjoy a nice cup of tea and eat something. Have a cookie.
Staci, welcome to The View from Abroad. We've talked about this before. I'm not going to, fake it like I've never mentioned this to you before, but it's just such a trip to me that we met walking along Bowen Path.
We did indeed. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And the first time I saw you on Bowen Path, I was a little intimidated because I had read the columns. I admired what you were doing. I wasn't sure if I dared say hello, but I did. And you were incredibly friendly. And it's a friendship as well as you're somebody
we've had some professional connections too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And being able to write about you then and think about what you did all those years ago now, it's absolute delight.
Well, listen, I'm just so pleased that you could find the time because you're a busy woman and have a lot on your plate and a lot of traveling and everything. And it was great that I get a chance to talk to you. So looking back on that column, T for Tung and Tung for Tea, I'm now an expat again in a brand new environment and very eager to make my place here in Portugal and become part of this community after 40 years in Hong Kong. And it seems like one of the points that I was making was I was aware that there was a lot of pre-handover concern and what I would almost call catastrophizing. People talk, the PLA is going to be rolling down the, Connaught Road. And I just recall, I didn't know this phrase at the time, but now it comes up for me. A friend of mine said that somebody who was a mentor of hers said, yeah, and what if it's good? And, for me and for many of my friends and colleagues who stayed in Hong Kong after the handover, it was good for a while and still good for many people. But things have changed. There's no question about that. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is that I referred to the good and bad things that went with the settlement of Asia by the West. And that seems to be something particularly today, more so today than when I wrote this idea of us looking at our history and coming to terms with some of the injustices. Here in Portugal, they refer to the golden age of discovery. But of course, a lot of looking at that golden age, there were terrible things that were part of that.
Sure.
Slavery, big on the list, but also other things about conquering and then taking what you want and leaving the rest, not in the best way.
For sure. Although I have to say, even in 1996, I think you were quite aware of those sorts of criticisms. And you talked about what brought you to Hong Kong and that you didn't have any sort of colonial love. It was more a matter of you were coming to Asia. And one thing that stood out for me at that point was that you were willing to claim home in a moment where foreigners who looked like us, I am also a Caucasian woman, it wasn't clear that we were so welcome in a certain way. And your column claimed Hong Kong as home, as well as, I think, challenged all of us to think about what if it's good instead of the catastrophizing that you mentioned.
Well, that was the hope. I had been interviewed by a lot of the Chinese press about, in particular, about being an expatriate, a non-local, and deciding to stay and considering it home. And when I was asked why, I said, I wished I'd given a better answer. And the thing that came up in the column was that I've learned patience. And I have to say that one of the beautiful things about getting older is I think if there's anything that's increased for me, it is patience. It's a sense that that very often things work out the way they're meant to. They don't always work out the way I'd like them to. They don't always work out in the time frame that Teresa would like.
Sure.
But I remember another friend of mine saying, everything in life gets solved or resolved one way or another. And I think if I keep that in my mind and I keep that in my heart, then I can, exercise more patience when things are not going the way that I feel they should.
I think that's good advice for all of us right now.
Yeah, right. I don't think I'm alone in feeling like that's an important thing today, because the difference is we get all this information so much faster.
Indeed. Although, again, you pointed out that the media, part of what was happening is that the media took a tremendous interest in Hong Kong in the moment without a real sense of the deep history that brought us to the moment.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, I think there were, old China hands and journos who were Hong Kong and China literate, but there were a lot of people. I was interviewed by Good Morning America, and what they they did, they came into my house because I
Wow.
must have been on some kind of a list of kooky American ladies who subscribed to feng shui, which was back in the
I think
90s.
I would be careful there. I think you were honestly one of the few Americans, maybe a few Westerners, who were speaking positively about what actually might happen, who also had, I don't know, it was a balanced view, but it was a positive view. There was a lot of anxiety, and I think your column cut through that.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. That means a lot to me. Here's the last point I wanted to make was just, this thing about looking at that newspaper and looking at a leader
Hmm.
and saying, take good care of yourself because we're counting on you to take care of us. And that feels to me, that almost puts a lump in my throat today, that it's not, there are so many people who don't feel that they can look at potential leaders, past leaders, present leaders, and feel that they're being cared for by somebody who's really thinking about them.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And you point out the whole idea of leadership as care, among other sorts of traits that we think about in a leader. And I think, again, it was an important moment for helping me think about the fact that I don't really know this man, right? I know what
Right.
the press has told me. And I think that column forced me to stop and say, wait a minute, let's give the guy a chance.
Yeah. Have a cup of tea, have a cookie. Let's see.
You still make
Well,
those cookies? They sound delicious, by the way, the orange pretzel cookies.
I have to tell you something. This is like my little red sports car. I, for the first time in my life, have a standing KitchenAid bright red mixer, because every year at Christmas, I make a kabillion Christmas cookies.
They sound delicious.
Well, listen, we are going to take a little commercial break, and then I'm always so interested to come back and hear what my guests have taken out of that column. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on topic, but just some word or some idea that brings a memory of their own to mind, and something we can talk about of whether or not that still feels relevant for them. Okay, Staci, listen, in addition to your role as affiliated associate lecturer teaching history and American studies and gender, you wrote this book, Troubling American Women, Narratives of Gender and Nation in Hong Kong. If you could give us a little snapshot of that, and then talk a little bit about this other book that you're working on now.
Happy to do that. And you actually introduced the book a little bit in terms of talking about your own role in it. I argue that from a very early time period, going back to the mid-19th century when Hong Kong became a British colony, there were American women there, and they were part of the community and were seen then and now as being troubling in certain ways, opinionated perhaps, or different from other Westerners. And what I found in my work was that actually Asian and Asian American women who were Americanized in certain ways were seen as the most troubling of all. So it's a play on words, but it's a discussion of the ways in which gender and culture and history all came together. as I was doing that book, I started thinking a little bit about men and their narrative. So I look at memoir, movies, television, popular culture. And what I realized is we actually don't know a lot about Asian and Asian American men. So we have a fair number of narratives by white Western men, but not so many by Asian diaspora men. So my work is in transnational American studies, and this new book helps us think about manhood and leadership. You mentioned that before the break. So Tung is one of many leaders who are talking about Asian values in the 1990s as sort of a response or a pushback against American exceptionalism, or what would have been called American neocolonialism, right? So this book sort of brings the story up to today, but it focuses on men, Asian and Asian American men.
I do leadership coaching, and I can remember early on in the work realizing that when they were talking about performance reviews and they were talking about leadership capabilities, it was, well, particularly for multinational companies, no matter where you were in the world, those benchmarks were based on American leadership ideas.
That's right.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it was really a privilege for me to work with some of the large Hong Kong Chinese companies and get an opportunity to really dig into what leadership looks like from a different perspective and different benchmarks. Yeah,
absolutely. And that is something that's exciting to think about going forward.
You said you refer to like movies and films and television. Could you color that a little bit more for me?
Just quickly, there are a lot of different examples, but a lot of my work has been in Hong Kong cinema and the ways in which Hong Kong and Hollywood have been in conversation with each other. So ideas about manhood in the movies, think about somebody like a Bruce Lee and his impact during the Cold War, but you can bring that all the way up to today, where you have a new generation, not just of martial arts heroes, but romantic leads, action stars. And these are young men, middle-aged men who in their movies, I argue, do leadership work, but they also have things to say about politics and culture and gender and generation. So think about a Jackie Chan, a Donna Yun, a Daniel Wu. These are, different generations of men in the movies who occupy the between space. They are trans-Pacific stars, but I argue that movies have been an important way of doing leadership because non-Caucasian men have still, even though Asia is full of Asian men, globally, our sense of who is running the show is still oftentimes white guys. And so popular culture has, over several generations, filled what I would say a leadership gap. And so I look at the ways in which men, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, are doing leadership labor. That's just one example. And then I think about memoir and social media and comedy even. So people like Ronnie Chang, Hassan Minhaj, Russell Peters, comedians who have done the work of what I call diplomedy, comedy and diplomacy together.
And I'm just thinking about, it's so true, the impact that films and media have on how men and women see themselves.
Yes.
Right? Yes. We had that whole era of movies that sort of came out in the 80s, like Working Girl. And where you saw there were good and bad things that came out of that, right? Because it was like the bad female boss and, the devil wears Prada, right?
Caricatures. And what's interesting is in the 80s, you have a similar body of work about Hong Kong women in New York City. So I wrote a little bit about a movie called An Autumn's Tale, which is an early Chow Yun-fat film, but it also stars Cherry Chung. And it was directed by Mabel Chung. And it was, I would argue, very much in conversation with Working Girl, the Nora Ephron films, When Harry Met Sally, and Sleepless in Seattle, and then You've Got Mail comes later. My point is there is a transnational conversation about women and men and change in the workplace as well as in personal lives. So women are very much a part of the story too, but men have to change as women's expectations change. And you see that in popular culture, Hollywood, Hong Kong, and then of course, Bollywood, in, the K-wave, also all over Asia.
I was in a movie with Chow Yun-fat.
Do tell. I need more right now.
I had a very small speaking part in a film that was, it was right after I got to Hong Kong, and the English title was Love in a Fallen City. And it was...
I know that. I've actually written about that movie. It's a very important movie.
Well, if you slow your camera down for like 7 seconds, you see me say something and smoke a cigarette. I don't know, but
wow.
But I was so thrilled to meet him.
An incredibly important movie based on an incredibly important short story by Zhang Ailing. Wow. And there's a bit about that exchange that comes later in the movie in Troubling American Women, in the chapter on World War II.
Wow. Okay, we're back, and now I get to ask that question that I so look forward to when I do this podcast. What phrase or idea came up for you that, was a catalyst for a memory?
There were several, but one that jumped out almost immediately was a phrase in the middle of the column that talked about we're living right smack dab in the middle of a history lesson. So now it's up to us to learn something. And as I mentioned earlier, when I first read the column, I was new to Hong Kong and it didn't feel like home. Today, Hong Kong is home, but as you mentioned, it has changed, and quite dramatically. And so I think for a time I was sad or frustrated about some of the changes that had occurred, but I am lucky enough to be to continue to teach at Hong Kong University. And we have a lot of students from all over the world, but particularly an influx of students from the Chinese mainland. And it's been really important for me to listen to them and learn from them and realize that we are all smack dab in the middle of a history lesson, and they have a different sense of history coming to Hong Kong than I have, having lived in Hong Kong and come from the US originally. And I think it's not a bad thing to think about Hong Kong in a new place and time through the eyes of that next generation. So it's helped me just shift perspective a bit.
Can you tell me a little bit about, like, what do those conversations feel like? How do they come up? Is it in a sort of classroom setting, or is it more sort of after the class and having a chat, or how is that manifesting itself?
Good question. I think it's both. I think it's in the classroom. The way I design my classes is they're quite interactive, and oftentimes popular culture becomes the common text. So, for instance, a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was a big, transnational Asian American blockbuster. Hong Kong students have one reaction, the mainland students have another reaction, right? And they oftentimes don't understand why China is portrayed in certain ways in Hollywood movies. And again, Everything Everywhere was not just a Hollywood movie. It was quite a special movie. But they really are very aware of the xenophobia, sort of the anti-China sentiment or stereotypes. So popular culture becomes a place for us to talk about some of that. But also the students who are coming, they're very excited to be in Hong Kong. They see it as different from where they have been in the mainland. And they honestly don't understand what all the fuss was about in terms of the protests.
That's really interesting. People who are coming from the mainland and are young and coming to live in Hong Kong. I mean, what are some of the things that stand out to them that feel different? Can you put your finger on, can you remember any of the?
I think there is more freedom of expression, and that's an adjustment for them. I think there's more access to media of all types, although again, China has its own very interesting and diverse media landscape, but it's different. And it's also an opportunity for mainland students to interact with Hong Kong Chinese students. and other international students. And I think we have several generations of diaspora now in the classroom. So we have students who were born in Hong Kong, but perhaps spent some time elsewhere in Europe, Australia, the US, Canada, and they're back in Hong Kong. But you have Hong Kong students who were born and raised, but Hong Kong has changed dramatically. And then you have mainland students from all over China, and China is an incredibly diverse place. So students, as you know from your work, so students from the big cities, from rural areas. It's
different
an exciting time.
provinces, right? Different provinces within a country that size.
Right.
The differences in terms of just the way, when I say the ways we communicate, I'm not just talking about dialect. I'm talking about the comfort with which we communicate with different types of people. If you've grown up somewhere where you've only really been exposed to people like you, that's true everywhere.
Exactly.
This is where I feel it's such a blessing to have spent so much time living in an international community. It must be fascinating to have all these young people from different backgrounds, gathered together, specifically talking about the subjects that you teach, which are, important to everyone.
It is. And I encourage people to come visit in all seriousness. I think it's a good time to come back to Hong Kong.
My son lives and works there, and I have so many friends there, and this was my home for 40 years. Of course I'll be back. Listen, Staci, I am so fond of you. You're a wonderful friend and such a fascinating, interesting, intelligent woman to
back at you, Teresa.
share with me today and share with all of us. So thanks so much.
Thanks to you.
I'm going to leave us with the thought that breathe all the time. That's always a good one. That's
good advice.
Scuba diving, but it is good advice. And come up slowly is also scuba diving, but that's good advice. But I'm also going to go back to what my friend said. And that is, when you're thinking that you're feeling overwhelmed, or you feel like what's tomorrow going to bring, remember that little phrase. And what if it's good? See you next time.